Alien abductees of Reddit, or people who have claimed to see a UFO. What's your story? Hold on to your cornfields, everyone. It's Em here. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Story 1. Okay, here it goes. The first time I'd ever seen anything, I was 7 in Houston, Texas. I used to climb on top of my mom's suburban driveway and stare at the stars. One night, I saw an intensely bright floating light over the tree line, probably about half a mile away. I hollered, but nobody came to see it. I did not see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th, but I can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, all houses the same size, all one story, and you had great visibility distance-wise. I walked out of my buddy's place at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright, starry night. When I walked out, something caught my eye to the left of me. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange, strobing flashing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe at it and did not want to go grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon behind my friend's place, and I saw the outline of the craft. It was a teardrop sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have the lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 to 75 feet behind it. This all occurred no less than 400 yards away from me. After past the moon, I ran inside and grabbed someone. He saw it, but it was too far away to make out what it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked up from the driveway, the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw 2 dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon, at a slow pace heading towards me. I then ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed. We stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate crafts flew over us. First came 2, then 1. About 6 to 7 minutes apart from each other, maybe 20 miles per hour, maybe 200 feet up. Completely silent. The way they looked from underneath was each one had 2 huge bright whites, which were about maybe 30 to 40 feet across. But they were so bright that it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe 150 to 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over lower and slower than the first 4 had. Then it made a noise. It let out a sound to this day that haunts me. It's hard to explain, but this was loud. The craft did it twice. These crafts flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting it knew we were watching it. Kind of like a hello? I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or I just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple weeks later. I was standing in my driveway smoking a cigarette, listening to my iPod, somewhere around 2 a.m. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the backlight, waving my hand over it a couple times, making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything come up, but I got that being watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with rounded edges that had a dark red and black pulsating glowing outline. It was like flowing electricity. It was not even 75 feet up. I could have hit this thing with a rock. I stood there while it hovered directly above me, completely silent, for maybe 10 to 15 seconds while it made this kind of motion, similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. It was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved one hand at it in a friendly manner. It then changed light pattern and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that it knew that I saw it, but made no effort to evade my detection, makes me think it wanted me to follow it, although I was too freaked out to think about that at the time. UFOs are one of those things that I unfortunately have a bit of a hard time believing, and I know what you're thinking. You believe in ghosts but not UFOs? And no, that's not it. It's just I have a hard time believing that every single sighting is something real, and not just a random aircraft of some kind. This one, though, seems much more believable than some of the other ones I've read. Part of me thinks that maybe this was real, and another more logical part believes that this could have just been a dream a kid had and convinced themselves it really happened. And then every experience after, their belief was impacted because of what they thought they saw all those years ago. Story 2. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53, I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appears to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over. So I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared and no car drove past. Now here's where the story takes a turn for the weird. And I am sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up, because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up and down, while the dome light and headlights started to flicker and turn off and back on. This was 10:56 p.m. I started thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I leaned down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why the F am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where the F is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs which read 350 North and 50 West. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. After about half an hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on the phone and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to get out to me, since I was a good distance away from the nearest town. During which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. Today, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is that I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car, in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I've only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I am sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy, or they would call BS on the whole story. And I can't blame them. If somebody came to me with a story like that so closely mirrors this stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. Whenever I hear of stories like this, my first thought isn't little green aliens and a typical UFO. I honestly start thinking of like Will Smith standing there in a black suit with sunglasses, holding the little memory forget stick. But in all seriousness, this honestly could be explained by maybe OP being drugged at some point, or some trauma could have happened that caused temporary amnesia for those couple of hours. So for me, this could go either way. Aliens, or just the human brain being weird. Story 3. I was on a wildfire just south of Dugway Proving Guards in Utah. We were in fire rigs driving to the incident area, 4 trucks in close convoy, when we heard helicopters. 8 black military choppers escorted us in formation for like 10 miles. We assumed they were just doing drills and using us for fake target practice or something. A little while later, we were parked and about to start hiking to the fire line, when suddenly a thin column of smoke shot probably about 200 feet into the sky. It was a good mile away, but the concussion was pretty significant when it hit us, and the noise was still ridiculously loud. We thought it was probably no big deal. We knew we were near a strike zone. A good 5 minutes later, an aircraft like nothing I have ever seen flew by us. At maybe 500 feet, it was flat black and sort of rectangular, but with fins and wells on the underside. It was moving pretty slow and was dead silent, so I have to assume it was some sort of stealth glider. It sounds ridiculous, but immediately reminded me of a huge flying Batmobile, Tim Burton era. After that, some military personnel got on our radio frequency and instructed us to leave the area immediately. When our crew chief asked who it was and why they signed off, and the incident commander, the guy in charge of managing the entire situation, came on the radios and said we were evacuating the area. They sent us to a completely different fire about 100 miles to the south and never told us why except that it was a higher priority, which was BS. It was already out when we got there and we just assisted crews in the mop-up operation. The thing that confuses me about this is that if the Army didn't want us to go see that crap, or if it was dangerous, why didn't they keep us clear of the area in the first place? Either a communications breakdown or they had a now crap situation going down and had to get us out of there without warning. Somebody commented, really happy this didn't end with a Loch Ness monster. Yeah, this to me could just be another story where the government was up to something. They just wanted to keep on the real lowdown and had to move civilians, so they couldn't say anything. So maybe it's a little fishy, but at least there is a likely explanation that it was just the government wanting to keep something under wraps, compared to like an alien invasion or anything. Story 4. 1997, Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was 8 years old, playing in the sand volleyball court at the park down the street from my house. I was engrossed in my activity, burying my collection of Happy Meal toys in the sand, and then digging them back out. Repeat. I was looking down but decided suddenly that I needed to look up because the world around me had lost all sound. There was no longer any ambient noise. No traffic noise from the busy streets just a block over. No more dogs barking. No more birds chirping. I looked at the street that bordered the park, and that is when I saw it. It looked like a stealth bomber turned sideways, nose leading, one wing down toward the road, and the other pointed up at the sky, completely shiny black in color, as tall as a house, shaped like an arrowhead. It was cruising the street at 3 miles per hour, just gliding over the road. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds. As soon as it passed behind some 2-story houses and out of my sight, I got my hearing back full force. I ran home with my pee-soaked pants and never spoke a word of it to anybody. Someone commented, "Okay, I'm pooping my pants." I know a lot of people are cracking jokes about this, but in 1997, I lived in Monument, Colorado, 20 miles north of Colorado Springs. I saw this too, except it was in the sky. Now, I lived right across from the Air Force Academy, so I was used to planes going overhead, but this black, arrow-headed shaped object was moving far too slowly to be any type of Air Force plane. Both my mom and I watched it inch across the sky for about 30 seconds. Literally, this thing was moving freakishly slow. I have no idea how I was able to stay afloat before either of us thought to grab a camera. By the time we got back outside, it was gone. To this day, the memory still brings chills. Story 5. I was traveling back home with my mom from my aunt's house on a warm, sunny afternoon. While I was sitting in the passenger seat, an object just appeared in the sky a little to our left. We both saw it immediately. The size of it was shocking more than anything. It had the classic saucer shape and was shining brightly because the sun was reflecting off of it. We continued driving down the road a few seconds, just admiring this craft, when all of a sudden we saw something I still don't believe to this day. It just vanishes, disintegrates, disappears, whatever you want to call it. I look back at my mom and I could tell by her expression she had seen the same thing. Since this sighting, I have always been interested in UFOs and the possibility of other life in our universe. This object in the sky was definitely not a helicopter, airplane, or a flock of geese. My mom and I still talk about the sighting we had and can't come up with a reasonable explanation as to what we saw that day. This is my UFO story, and it is not a hoax or fabrication. Everyone always laughs at me when I tell this story, but that's fine. I know what I saw. Hey, props to OP for standing their ground and not being upset that people don't believe them. This could have just been a weird-shaped cloud and then a trick of the light. Science people could probably explain it better than me. Or it could have actually been a UFO. Whatever it was, happy for you, OP, that you're so nonchalant about other people's opinions and confident in what you and your mom saw. Story 6. Back in spring of 1997, a group of us neighborhood kids were looking up at the night sky, observing the Hale-Bopp comet. I grew up hours from any major city, so the view was pretty clear. After a while, we started to notice a red and white dot circling around each other, making sudden movements in every direction, like no aircraft I have ever seen or have ever seen since. At a certain point, they merged into one craft, then shot out 3 smaller crafts. Although we couldn't tell whether it was a craft because they just appeared to be balls of light. This went on for a couple hours. Right before the lights disappeared, they accelerated at lightning fast speed into the darkness. We all went home, terrified of what we saw. The next day on the front page of our small hometown paper, it said it received several calls. The explanation they gave was that the local airport was testing aircraft. I'm not sure how much I believe that story because of what I saw. To this day, whenever I see my friends that were there that night, we'll sometimes talk about it. None of us can be sure what we saw, but to this day, none of us have ever seen anything like it.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.